Well, hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar that we're calling How to Empower Your Staff to Do the Right Work. As church leaders, we all want our teams to be united, creating great outcomes for our ministry. And the truth is that our teams want the same thing. They want to feel the fulfillment of hitting a home run in their roles. Before we jump into the content, though, let me do some quick introductions. My name is Sean. I'm the Director of Consulting here at the Unstuck Group. I've been on the team for 8 years now as part of our leadership team, helping pastors step into a consulting process that really we want to help them increase the health of their church. I'm also joined by my teammate, Amy Anderson. Amy is the Managing Director here at the Unstuck Group. She's been on our team since 2015. And during that time, she served more than 200 churches, both in on-site consulting and coaching and cohorts, helping them with their ministry, staffing, and multi-site strategies to align them. That's going to be a lot of our conversation today, and then fuel the accomplishment of their mission. So, Amy, I am totally biased. I'll just admit that here from the very beginning, but I consider you the expert on this topic. So I'm really grateful that you're helping me with this conversation today.
Yeah, I have worked with countless senior pastors who feel overwhelmed just by their own responsibilities. And then while sometimes questioning if their staff really knows what they should be doing. You know, it's not that the pastor wonders, are they working, but are they working on the right stuff, like the stuff that matters? And so that's right, the alignment thing. When we don't have clarity around goals and priorities, when we don't have that, I think it's a fair question that the senior pastor's like, what's everyone doing? Is it the right stuff? But when we have the alignment, we have so much more assurance. And so here's the good news and why we're doing this webinar today. It's because it's a solvable problem. It is possible to bring clarity to everybody on your team to what success looks like for your church, for your ministry area, and even for yourself personally. So it's going to be fun to dive into it.
That's good. In my own personal experience, I've been on both sides of this issue. There have been times when the team was pulling in different directions and times when we were perfectly aligned and unified around what we were doing. And the difference usually came down to clarity on how each person's role connected to the bigger picture. Amy, do you think most senior pastors know exactly what everyone on their team is working on? And is that even something that they should be concerned about, do you think?
I don't think they can help being concerned about it. Lead pastors, they carry a load mentally, emotionally, spiritually that others on the team just don't. And they feel responsible for the whole of the church's ministry. But they're often very busy with the teaching load that they carry and other responsibilities. And if you think about that, you know, the 52 events a year that we talk about, you know, the weight of the teaching on their shoulders, when they hit those low points, that's when I think it's easy for them to look around and wonder what everyone's doing because they're feeling like I am working so hard. What are they even doing? And they don't necessarily want to know all the details of what their staff is working on, but they want to know, do they know the win? And are they able to prioritize and put their best time on the most important things they need to do, right? They want that assurance that everyone is contributing to what the church wants to accomplish. I think the mistake some lead pastors make is they try to manage it. They actually dive in too deep into all those details. And that is not what we want our pastors doing. That is not helpful for anybody. Right. But it's often the case. They dive a little deeper into the organization when that work of alignment is missing. And by alignment, I mean the organization, the team is clear on what success looks like for the church, for their ministry area, and personally. And I think without it, Sean, it just creates this mental burden for the pastor. And frankly, I think it just disperses the church's energy, their resources, their time. So it's important work to get done.
Yeah. As we work through today's content, we want to challenge you, the listener, to commit to make whatever changes are necessary this fall to connect the big picture to every staff member's everyday work. We're going to walk through the conversation today in 3 specific steps. Step 1 is going to be clarifying the critical roles of a senior pastor. Step 2 is about empowering ministries to focus on the right priorities. And then step 3 is to help staff members understand how they contribute. So a few last details before we jump into the content. You can use chat to kind of drive some of the live conversation during today's webinar, and then use the Q&A button to submit questions for the live Q&A that we'll be doing at the end of today's discussion. You'll see our team, Amy, Tiffany, Sarah, and myself interacting in chat and Q&A today. And then just know for any questions that we're not able to get to in today's content, we only have so much time, but we'll try to include responses to those questions in our future content. We also have a companion workbook to go with today's conversation. And if you'd like to download that, you can go to the unstuckgroup.com/workbook. That's the unstuckgroup.com/workbook. And then if you'd like to share today's conversation on social media, you can do that on X, formerly Twitter. Everyone still calls it Twitter, though, Amy.
I know, but they do.
We've got to say X. And Facebook as well. And you can use the hashtag UnstuckChurch. Hashtag UnstuckChurch. Okay? All right, let's get into the content. So, Amy, we have a significant number of senior pastors watching today's webinar. So let's start by talking about their role specifically in creating alignment and unity in the team. You can't help your team become more clear on what they need to be doing until you're fully clear about the roles that only you own. So I wonder, Amy, could you share more about the 4 key roles senior pastors need to focus the best of their time on?
Yeah, and if you've been around our content for any time, you've heard these before, but we can't talk about them enough. So The first role that a senior pastor can't delegate to anyone is vision casting. They have the primary ownership of helping people buy into the vision, because as a senior pastor, you are the primary voice to that your people hear on a regular basis. That's why you can't delegate vision to anybody else. And at its core, when it comes to vision casting, the key question you need to answer as the lead pastor is, where do you sense God is taking our church in the future? And this doesn't mean you have to develop or define the vision alone. We often say you do not need to be Moses coming down from the mountaintop. In fact, we encourage pastors to use small teams of leaders, usually between 6 to 10 people, to actually speak into future direction. But again, the point of vision is that you need to paint this clear, compelling picture of where you sense God is calling your church into the future. Can't delegate it. You need to set the vision. Then you need to cast that vision to your staff, to the congregation. And I started here because this responsibility is crucial to the whole conversation we're going to have today. If it's unclear where the church is headed, it will be nearly impossible to align the team. So we'll get more into that in just a little bit. The second role that you can't delegate is being the spiritual leader and teacher of your church. And because spiritual leadership can't be delegated, if you're the lead pastor, you need to delegate whatever gets in the way of great teaching. We talked about this so much on the podcast a few years ago. There are so many things that creep into a senior pastor's schedule, and that message sometimes can get pushed and pushed and pushed closer to the weekend. And of course, then we don't always give it our best. So as the owner of the teaching, you need to own the quality of the teaching, as well as the responsibility for ensuring that all the teaching in your church aligns to your biblical and your quality standards. So spiritual teacher and leader. The third one is being the leader of leaders. So no matter the size of your church or your staff team, you can't neglect your role to identify and develop other leaders to give ministry away. In fact, you're modeling that for your ministry leaders to give it away to volunteer leaders, to give it away to volunteers. And fourth, just quickly, is that you cannot delegate being the culture champion of your church. And when we talk about culture at Unstuck, we really talk about it like this is how your team behaves. So as marketer Seth Godin, I don't know, is it Godin? Godin? I never know if I'm saying it.
I think it's Godin.
Godin.
Yeah.
We'll go with Godin. That sounds more spiritual. He defines a phrase around culture that people like us do things like this. So senior pastors can't leave that up to chance, hoping team members will figure it out on their own. Again, if you're the senior pastor, it's your responsibility to help other team members figure out what it looks like to live out the behaviors you believe are going to be helpful for your church to carry out its mission. So those are the 4 undelegatable areas of responsibility. Is that a word, John? I like it, undelegatable.
Sure you made it a word if it's not a word. You said it convincingly.
Thank you. So undelegatable responsibilities, vision casting, spiritual leader, leader of leaders, and culture champion. And I went through those pretty fast, but if this is something any of you want to go deeper on, we have a whole ebook on this subject in the Unstuck Learning Hub. And before I lead this, maybe it's you could get it, but basically everything beyond those 4 things, lead pastors, you can delegate it. And we kind of want you to delegate it, because if you do those 4 things really well, you're going to be leading a healthy church.
That's good. All right, let's talk about good delegation for a second too. And the reason we start with the senior pastor's role is that once you can understand what you can't delegate to anyone else, then you can begin to identify what you can, and I would suggest should delegate to others. In my experience, though, a lot of senior pastors struggle to delegate effectively. And I think for some, it's a matter of not feeling like they have enough time. Delegation, when you do it right, it takes time to train and empower someone else to do what you're already doing. And what's kind of ironic about this is because we end up being less efficient in the long run by not delegating. It's all about, we haven't taken the time to hand off responsibility well. And so that leads to inefficiencies in our time and schedule in the future. So taking the time now really pays off. I think for other pastors, there's a lack of trust that likely exists. They just aren't confident that they have the right people in the right roles to carry the responsibilities forward. And we work with that. Amy, you work with that all the time with churches through our staffing and structure process. And as you mentioned earlier, Amy, some pastors just haven't clarified what winning looks like in each of the ministry areas. And when you don't know what success looks like for yourself or for everyone else, it's really hard to let go of some of those things. You just carry the mental weight of it all yourself. So let me offer just a few ideas on how to develop the muscle of healthy delegation, if that's an area that you sense you're weaker in as a leader. First, I'd recommend making a list of tasks, and in one column, add the 4 roles that a senior pastor can't delegate. And then if there's anything else, other responsibilities that come to mind you feel like you can't give away, let's put that in column 1. Then make a list in another column of responsibilities with the right training and gifting somebody else could manage. I want you to remember the 70% rule as you do that. So the 70% rule says that if someone can do the task at least 70% as well as you can, then delegate it. It'll free up your time and help them grow. And eventually what I've seen personally is it may be 70% now, but it's 110, 120% at some point because they get better at it than you could have ever been.
Sean, I'm so glad you brought that 70% rule up. When you started and you said you think that most senior pastors have a hard time delegating, I think just people have a hard time delegating. And it's for a lot of us as leaders, it's that thing. But you just gave us permission to go, I'm not looking for the 100% person. I'm looking for the 70%. So I hope even for all of our listeners, even if you're not a senior pastor, that helps you remember, how do I continue to develop leaders of leaders? And that comes from giving things away.
That's right. Okay, now, so you have your 2 lists, and there are 5 steps that I want you to remember as you think about empowering others with these responsibilities. And you can find these actually just easily if you do a search for the delegation wheel. And I'm not really sure who to give credit to for this. I couldn't find an exact name, but this is a helpful tool. So the first step is choose wisely. Decide what to delegate, and then make sure you pick the right person for the job. That's step number 1. Second step is to explain and train. Say why you're delegating and then give clear instructions of what the next steps look like with that responsibility. Number 3 is set expectations. Clearly state this person's new authority level with whatever the responsibility is and your expectations of how they follow through on that. Step 4 then is to monitor progress. Make sure you check in regularly, but do not micromanage their work. You're empowering them, right? And the last step number 5, is provide feedback. Give constructive feedback and recognize and celebrate good work when it's done. Okay.
That's good.
So we've made the case for senior pastors on the responsibilities they should and shouldn't delegate. So let's introduce now, Amy, the strategic alignment pyramid. As pastors are empowering their team to do the right work, could you show us why it's so critical to be clear in each area of what we call the directional level?
All right. Well, this is a strategic alignment pyramid. We are not going to go through the foundational level today, but this is very important as well. Where we're going to spend our time is actually looking at the directional level of the pyramid. And this is one of those areas where lead pastors, again, leader of leaders, this is the responsibility of yours with your senior leadership team to make sure that we get this defined. So let me walk through it. I'll start here at the vision level. Like I said earlier, this vision level is defining where we're going as a church. Often this is like a 3 to 5 year expression of the future. It's tangible. We'll know 3 to 5 years if we actually got there. But this just defining, it gets reset. It's not at the bottom of the pyramid. So it's not like it never changes, but it's in a little bit deeper. So we aren't looking for this to be revisited every year, but taking time every 3 to 5 years to go, what's the next hill we're going to be taking? What does it look like for our church? What might God do through our church? The next level up here is what we call the mission goals. I often interchangeably call them just your organizational goals. But this is defining what success looks like for your church over the next 12 months. So this is a 1-year kind of target. And when we set mission goals or organizational goals, we'll measure a lot more than maybe this high level, we'll call it a dashboard. But we often encourage churches to think through, what does success look like in the area of reaching new people, right? That part of the Great Commission. So things we measure there are things like weekend attendance. We'll measure things like how many new people we have in the database. Like, what are those things that we need to be measuring that indicate we actually have some new people walking through our door, becoming known at our church? And then, of course, the other part of these goals would be our spiritual formation targets. So are people actually taking those next steps of faith? Are they getting connected in whatever your pathway is? Commonly, it's people get connected in groups, or they start to serve, they start to give, those types of things. But it's stepping back and just saying, in light of our 3 to 5 year vision, what does success look like for us? And these are numbers typically, but remember, numbers represent people. And getting a picture for the whole organization, what we're all rallying around. Okay. Once we do that, then we get to this level of strategy, which answers the question, how will we actually accomplish our goals? And it's really important that strategies follow the actual goals we're going after. In other words, if you wanted to reach, say, 200 new people next year, we have to kind of name what's our primary strategy to actually accomplish that then. In my case, when I was on staff at a church, we always said our weekend service was really our main strategy to reach new people. And so as a leader of that, if we weren't tracking towards our attendance targets or seeing people cross their line of faith, it was really that strategy we had to put kind of under the spotlight to see, why is it effective? Why is it ineffective? What do we need to change? So how we do ministry always needs to follow what the goal is. Anything you'd add to that, Sean?
No, I think that's good. I think the other thing for pastors to keep in mind is approaching the conversation in this order. You have it laid out in a specific way here for a reason, and that each of these conversations build off of each other. So if you're thinking about, what this would look like in your church specifically, you can't just jump straight to strategies and then try to answer, well, what would our vision be because of that? You have to start with, God, where are we going? Where do you see us in the next 3 to 5 years, and then build your goals and strategies from that. And that right. becomes even more important with the next thing you're going to talk about, Amy, the structure.
Yeah, it will. So once we understand, again, where we're going, what success looks like this next year, we've confirmed our ministry strategies, how we're going to accomplish those goals. Then the last part of the directional level is really how are we now going to structure our ministries and our teams so that they are best aligned to accomplish the goals that we have laid out. You can imagine if we work the other direction on this pyramid, then we're going like, who do we have? What things have we been doing? Now, what do we think we can accomplish? And it really boxes us in. Whereas when we go the other direction, it gives us some freedom of thought. So let me just show you a quick example of the organizational goals. So we set our vision, our 3 to 5 year vision. Now, this is what we believe success looks like for the organization. So I mentioned we look at some metrics that really indicate, do we think we're doing a good job reaching new people? And then other metrics here in the orange that it's more, are we seeing people take spiritual steps, right? Are we growing in our spiritual formation? So this might be an example of a large church and what was accomplished in 2025. And then this would be an example of certain things that they would be tracking at a senior leadership team level. Remember, we're at the directional level of the pyramid. At a senior leadership team level, what are the things we want to see in our dashboard? What are the important metrics we want to keep in front of us on a regular basis? So those organizational goals, going back to this pyramid here, this is what the senior leadership team owns. This is what they are responsible for so that the whole organization has clarity around what is success looking like for the organization. What are our primary ministry strategies? So when organizations have this type of clarity, this is where we have that alignment that we're always looking for, right? If we don't have this alignment, what we often happens is we just have a series of mini pyramids all over the place doing their own thing, not aligned. Again, we are distributing our resources, our focus, our teams are dispersed. I think the churchy word for it is a church like that is siloed. When we forget to do this area as a leadership team, we end up getting siloed. So that's the work of the senior pastor and the senior leadership team to build out this directional level of the pyramid so that we can actually get up to this action level, which we're going to cover in a little bit, so that your ministry teams and your every employee, every team member is aligned with the work that you're trying to set forth.
That's really helpful, Amy. Let me mention just a couple of things. One, that chart that you showed with the metrics and the goals on it, you showed a good example of a large church, but that really works for any size church, and we do this with all sizes of churches. The numbers would look different, and the percentages of change would look different, but it certainly works for any size church. The other thing is I can just anticipate, we went through that fairly quickly. People tuned into the webinar right now are hoping we'd go back and show that chart again, but we'll send out the replay of this webinar if you'd like to see that chart again in more detail. We don't have time to go back to it now, but you can get the webinar replay and then look at it as much as you'd like to. Okay. Before we move on, we're going to give you just a few seconds to reflect and jot down some thoughts. If you're a senior pastor, I want you to take notes on which of the 4 roles you need to focus on developing the most in the coming months. Those 4 roles a senior pastor can't delegate. If you're a ministry leader at your church, not the senior pastor, jot down where your team has some work to do when it comes to the directional level of the pyramid. Again, we're going to give you a few seconds just to reflect, write down some notes, and then we'll be back with step 2 in the webinar. So let's talk about how you clarify what success looks like for each of your ministry areas and start creating real alignment in your team. Amy, how do we connect the church's purpose to each ministry area?
Yeah, well, the key is to help each ministry understand how they specifically contribute to the church's overall vision. And, the leadership team, they did the work of defining the organizational or mission goals for the team, but now they need to define what part of each ministry owns those goals. So in other words, for ministry leaders, they need to know the answer to 3 questions. What specific outcomes are we responsible for? How do those outcomes support the church's vision? And then what metrics will tell us if we're succeeding? So that's going to bring us to the action level of the pyramid. So I'm going to share my screen again just to kind of connect all the dots. All right, there's your chart again if anyone was asking about it. But if I go back to the pyramid for just 1 minute, as we were talking before, we said this is a senior leadership team's responsibility. Their next step, though, is actually then to break out by senior leader and bring clarity to what ministries own what, meaning how will each ministry contribute to this? So if we look at these goals again that we were just looking at, this is obviously for the whole church. We want to take these numbers now and begin to cascade these goals throughout the organization. So in this example, these are the same numbers we just looked at. How I often break these down with churches is there's an executive kind of thing that everybody on the executive team owns, like per capita giving. We might have some champion or some stewardship people, but in general, they're going to keep, as a team, keep an eye on that. Sometimes new people in the database. But let's just take a look at the weekend leader, what I would say a weekend leader owns. Number 1, in-person attendance. Again, if your weekend service is your primary strategy to reach new people, then we would want the weekend leader to have the ownership of that number. Online attendance, typically people who are overseeing the in-person experience often have responsibility for the online, so we put that number in there. And then within the weekend team, we divvied out of the 600 volunteer leaders we were hoping to put in place 20. Discipleship leader, you can see where theirs falls. The number of people getting baptized, the students and adults that are engaged in serving, students and adults engaged in groups, and a lion's share here of the volunteer leaders that we'd like to get in place. And then family ministry, you can see how those numbers break out. Here's why I say this. We have to drive ownership in the organization. We say it all the time. If everybody owns it, nobody does. So the example I use, like with the weekend attendance, it was really my job to keep an eye on that when I was over the weekend. And if it started to soften or go the other direction, it was my job to lay awake at night, raising the red flag like something's up. It was my job to kind of brainstorm what might be off. If I didn't have that, if I just thought, well, the lead pastor will do that or the so-and-so, I didn't teach a message. I didn't usher in the room, but it is what I owned. Likewise, when it comes to like these next steps, like in baptism, and you can see we had to break it down between discipleship and family because baptisms happen in both places. But I need to know as a discipleship leader that's one of the metrics that I own. Or even like maybe serving's a better example, Sean. This is how many people they want to see adults and students serving in the discipleship area. And then you can see its counterpart in the family ministry area. That doesn't mean that that's the person who has to recruit all the volunteers for everybody, that leader. It just means somebody has to keep their eye on those metrics. Somebody has to understand if we're, overall, if we're healthy as a church in those areas. So that's what this chart kind of does. It breaks it down by these primary lanes. And then within it, we're breaking it out more specifically. So let me pause there, Sean. Anything you would add to that?
Yeah. So Amy, I see that like overarching baptism number, for example, but you're actually asking the senior leadership team to think through, how many adults are being baptized, how many kids, how many students, and then break that out by ministry area.
That's correct? Right. And also I should add, if you're a multi-site church, you also have to break this out by location first. Right. So if 3325 is the attendance goal and you're a 2-location church, we want to break that big goal out to a campus level first. So you can kind of sense how it all cascades. The key is we want every leader to know what they own. So moving from this chart brings us to maybe a more specific example here. And I want to talk about family ministries. So if we went back one chart, you can see these numbers here. All I did was carry it over to their dashboard. And they're all represented here. But this is a larger church, so likely they've got a leader over birth through pre-K, elementary, middle school, high school. I don't know exactly, different people organize it differently. But now it's that family ministries leader responsibility to break out their big goals, again, into the various ministry lanes. This is continuing to bring clarity around who owns what success for me looks like. So you can see it's both in the reach and the spiritual formation. And by the way, there's negotiation with some of these things. I should add that. Senior leadership team has to break it out into kind of the big chunks. But from there, it's really about having a conversation. It's really about setting a target. It's about dreaming what God might do. And, if we miss it by 10, who cares? At least we're striving and we're challenging ourselves with what strategies we're choosing to actually get there. So breaking it out here, now this family ministry leader knows what they're communicating to their team as far as what success looks like. And those team members know this is actually the win. So the ministry priority, I think if we do this breakdown this far, it really gives each ministry area a lot of good information. So they know kind of what's expected of them and what the win feels like.
That's good. Amy, you've mentioned several times now the senior leadership team is setting these targets. And I just want to say there may be the temptation for some pastors to say, well, I don't really know. Maybe let's just let the kids ministry director make that decision. It's actually in creating alignment. It's important for the senior leadership team to set these goals and then work with through conversation other ministry leaders. Because again, we're trying to unite all of our ministries and all of our individuals' priorities back to this larger target, this bigger bullseye that we have as a church. And if the senior leadership team is delegating the responsibility to defining those targets, then you're going to really struggle to create alignment within that. So you said that several times. I didn't want to miss that. It's important that the senior leadership team, the executive team, whatever you call that in your church, that group of primary decision makers and leaders sets those clear targets and goals.
Yeah. And the other point I'd make, I said the word cascade a couple times. I just want you to know this really isn't a cascade. It is, but a cascade is so easy, right? It's like the Plinko game, just like boom, 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 boom. Everything cascades down to what it needs to be. I think I got this from Andy Stanley years ago. You almost have to flip it. and feel like as leadership, you're on the bottom of this thing and you have to push this information throughout the organization. It's a discipline to do this work and to communicate and to keep pushing it to not just the ministry level, but then get it down to those individual leaders and team members so that they have clarity on what they're doing. And let me give one more. Some of you might be thinking about this, or maybe it's in chat right now. But sometimes I work with churches that they're just not used to numbers. In fact, maybe they had a bad history with numbers. Maybe they just have never really used that to communicate what they're hoping to achieve. They're just trusting God every year and trying to do the right things. I worked with a great church this year, and that's where they're at. They're like, we're not sure our organization, our church, our ministry team is ready for this new focus. And yet these leaders are like, but we want it. Finally, we're getting some clarity on what we need to look at, what we need to keep our eye on. So in that case, with that church, I said, you guys as a senior leadership team, you need to set these goals overall. You need to have an understanding on what success looks like. But let's maybe not do the whole kit and caboodle this year with your team. One of the things, Sean, that they were really, was a priority for them was getting more volunteer leaders engaged in their ministry. And so I said, just take that goal. Take that volunteer leader number and make that one the one that you publicly roll out to the whole team. You're still going to watch all the other metrics you're measuring, but what do we call it? The WIG, the wildly important goal. Make that a WIG this year and just get everyone learning how to deal with numbers by giving every ministry a volunteer leader goal, and then the people who work there. So, for example, back to our family ministry example, I think they had 140 leaders that they had as a target. Well, the middle school leader knows part of my role is to get 35 new volunteer leaders by the end of the year, in the mix. Yeah. So that's just another way that you can think about it.
That's good.
So that's the ministry priority level of the pyramid.
That's really good, Amy. I've worked with some churches where the numbers aspect of this is a hang up. And I try to bring them back to the principle of what the intention behind all of this is really just to define, what does success look like? How do we know if we're being successful? And senior pastors, I guarantee you that the vast majority of your staff wants to be successful in their role. They want to know, what does a home run look like for me? And when they don't have clarity around that, they end up feeling like, I'm just hitting bunts constantly. And that is not a good feeling. You want to be able to knock the ball out of the park, and you want to feel the celebration, the success of that. And as we look at some of these numbers, when you think about baptism, when you think about people stepping into volunteer leadership, those numbers represent real people who are moving along a spiritual formation pathway within your church. And that's so critical, that the numbers are a way for us to kind of calculate success. But if we bring ourselves back to that thought of, what does success look like for us? It's movement in spiritual formation.
Yep.
And really, at the end of the day, that's what we should be celebrating. Before we move on, we've given you space in the workbook to list your key ministry areas. Take a moment to jot those down and circle any that you believe don't currently have a clear enough understanding of the 3 key questions that we said every ministry needs to be able to answer. What specific outcomes are we responsible for? How do those outcomes support the church's vision? And then what metrics will tell us if we're succeeding? So we'll give you just a few seconds to reflect on that, and we'll be back with step 3. Okay, finally, let's get to the individual level of the pyramid. This is where the magic happens, and the people on your staff and every level of the organization have clarity about how they contribute to the mission. Right, Amy?
Yes, this is where the real empowerment happens. We've been building this out. We started at the foundational level, the directional level that the senior leadership owns, and now we're up at the action level. And we just talked about ministry clarity, ministry wins, and now we're going to get to the personal wins. And this way, every staff member will understand how their goals connect to the church's vision, how their work connects to their ministry goals, and what specific responsibilities they own. The goal is that every person on your team can answer the question, how does my daily work help our church accomplish its mission? So let me show you how this work continues to be pushed to the team members. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. As we talk about personal priorities, there's two kind of phases of what we're looking at here. The first are the lag goals. Okay, these are the results. So if we go back to our chart here and we look at the family ministries lane again, these are the lag goals. And these are going to be important to have because, again, the lag goals will indicate are our strategies that we're actually running, are those plays working? Lag measures, obviously here, weekend attendance, per capita giving, number of people in small groups. And while those are important measures, they aren't the only measures we need to be focused on. Because once we hit a lag goal, there's nothing you can do about it, right? When I step on the scale tomorrow, it is what it is. I don't have any control over that. So the other measure that I want to talk about are lead measures. And some of you are familiar with this. This came out of a book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. But lead measures, instead of just telling like lag, what you did, lead measures actually tell you, if I do this, I bet it's more likely I will achieve the goal. In other words, lead measures are all called lead activities. These are the things you can do that you have control over that will impact that lag goal. In the book, they talked about like car reliability. You can't control how often your car breaks down. That's a lag measure. But you can control how often your car receives routine maintenance, right? So I know I regularly bring my car in, and it's just part of, hopefully those lead activities will minimize the bad lag measures in that one. Or, my husband's a golfer. Your golf score is actually a lag measure. A lead measure would be things like how much time he spends on the driving range or taking lessons to improve the game. So again, lead measures help you make progress towards the goal. They represent the activity that moves the needle or progress towards it. So that's part of where we're going to take this at the action level for personal priorities. We do want to have a dashboard of sorts for each employee, but we also want to talk about those lead activities. Going back to our scorecard for family ministries, we're just going to focus on the elementary leader here so that I can kind of give you an example of how to set both the lag and the lead activities. So we'll carry this over to the next chart. And this is probably how it starts. Just giving your elementary leader their actual lag goals for attendance, salvations, baptisms, serving, and volunteer leaders. So that's the starting point. So the next point then is to ask yourself, and by the way, you might want to do this as a team the first time around because it's a little bit different thinking, but you're going to start to ask your team members, what do you need to spend your time on that will help us accomplish these actual goals, right? What do you have control over? What can you do with your time so that we have a better chance of hitting these goals? I heard one church, they were launching a new campus. And I remember they told their new campus pastor, who they just had named and hired, like one of his lead activities, these personal priorities, was to have 100 cups of coffee that month. Because he was out trying to build teams and volunteer leaders. And so he's like, you've probably experienced this if you've ever been in sales, right? You have to make so many calls so that you can get this lag result. That's kind of what he was doing. I'm having coffee, building relationships, and I'll have a lot more people on my team if I have 100 coffees this month than if I had 2. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. So here's some examples of personal priorities, lead activities for this elementary. One would be, I'm going to meet with one existing volunteer each week to connect and assess and invite to a higher level leader role on my team. We would hope if I did that with one existing volunteer each week, that would churn this leader's number. I'm going to meet and introduce myself to 5 to 10 new people each weekend. We would hope that would start to churn this serving and the attendance number. Each weekend, invite 2 people to be a part of the kids team. That should drive the serving number, and so on and so on. You can read through those. Let me read one more, though. Design and execute 10 gospel opportunities in large and small group environments. That gets into kind of some of the content and the programming. But if I were the kids pastor, the elementary pastor, and I gave time to think through how am I going to spend my time, and now my leader knows these are the things I'm committed to, don't you think we're going to have much more likely to hit the results that we believe God gave us?
Of course. Yeah.
So it gets tricky in some areas, and it takes a while to build this muscle. But even if you just look at this list, if you just screenshot it, it starts to open you up to going, I'm just really in advance determining how I'm going to spend my time. And I'm going to talk about it with my manager, my supervisor. We're going to make it better. And then we're going to assess, are these lead activities we're doing truly helping us move those numbers? And those numbers, again, are people. So this is a great exercise, again, to do as a team the first time around. A church I worked with out in Pittsburgh, when they did it, they took time to kind of think through what they thought their lead activities could be. Then they got together with other teammates and they shared, and they just made it better and made it better. Mm-hmm. So this would be the work to get us back to where we started. There we go. Now we have these personal priorities, these personal dashboards, which connect to our ministry, which connects to our mission goals. And don't you think a lead pastor would now have a lot more confidence? Like, I think everyone knows what the priorities are. I think we know what we're working on.
Yep. Absolutely. Another best practice with that, Amy, that I've seen is just developing kind of a regular rhythm around planning those personal priorities. So It's a great church that I've been engaged with for a number of years in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area called Anthem Church. And Anthem Church is a church of less than 1,000 attenders, but a healthy, growing church. And they have had a process and a rhythm for developing personal priorities for their team. Based around a 6-week time period. So they have a 6x6 where it's 6 priorities in 6 weeks. And really they're working on a 2-month rhythm, because they'll do 6 weeks of those priorities and then they'll take 2 weeks to kind of reset for the next run. And that's been a really good rhythm for them. I was at their church just a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if this is still true, but one of the things that I loved is they actually printed out each team member's priorities and placed them in a common area where everyone could see them. So everybody knew what everyone was working on, what their priorities were, and then how that aligned back to the larger vision of their church. So great execution on their end and a really good rhythm for their team for how they were developing those.
Yeah, I'll jump on that too. Often we get the question like, how often should we revisit these? I mean, they're set annually, but you should be talking about these in your one-on-ones. Every one-on-one, and by the way, I think about this in the terms of monthly one-on-ones where we really do a full agenda and a full dive into priorities and goals. But we should talk about them every month. How are we doing? Are you having those coffees? Are you, how are your gospel message weekends coming together? Whatever those people commit to, you should have visibility to that as a leader, and we should talk about it. And then, Sean, I love what you're talking about. You called it a 6x6. Some of the teams I work with, we call it a 4x4. And at their team meeting, so again, if I'm the elementary leader, when I'm with the family ministries team, we actually use Post-its. Here are the 4 most important things I need to get done over the next 4 weeks. We put them on a board. And then it's great because then the team weighs in and says, I don't see that you're meeting with any, current volunteers to invite them into a higher level role. And you'd be, well, it's camp week. So I had to, move that to the side. But everybody's engaging with it. And sometimes you even discover duplicity where 2 people are working on the same thing. But it brings visibility, like you said. It also brings accountability. And the next time y'all get together, it's so fun to cross off some of those 4x4s. I mean, some of those things that we have, because so much of our work becomes invisible with it's week after week. And so it adds to having a little bit of celebration as well to all the work that people are doing. So that is building out the action level of the pyramid. I hope it was helpful.
Well, Amy, hopefully this has been really helpful for those who've tuned in. And we're going to get into live Q&A in just a second and answer some specific questions. But any final thoughts as we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think you said it at the beginning, Sean. Your high performers, your leaders, they want this kind of clarity because it brings, just a clear awareness to, this is my job. This is what you want me to go do. This is what you want me to go build. So I think sometimes we can step back from this level of clarity because it can scare some people, but it's very motivating for your high performing leaders. They love that clarity. And second thing I would just remind you is that creating this alignment, it's not a one-time event. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's all right to get it wrong. Like you might have been like, I thought we'd grow by 5% last year. We grew by 10, like something's working with it, or vice versa. It's just about, again, bringing visibility to everything and learning from the things we do well, that we know we did it well, learning from things that aren't working so we can change them. Yeah. And lastly, when everyone understands how their work connects to the bigger picture, I really believe your church will experience new levels of effectiveness. And for the lead pastors out there, when you do this well, I think that pastoral burden that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar will be lightened.
And we focused on the action level of the pyramid here at the end of the webinar, but don't forget, if you're listening today, I mean, there's a reason that Amy started with that directional section in the middle of the pyramid. You really can't answer those action level questions, the ministry and personal priorities, until you have clarity around your vision, your goals, your strategies. And that's why we help churches. It's why we have our Unstuck process, to help them create clarity around that directional level of the pyramid so they can answer those questions. And that's the first step in the work, and clarifying what the day-to-day priorities of your team are. So if that's something we can help with, we'd love to be able to do that. Before we move into live Q&A, I'm going to give you just a second and go back to our decision reminder from the very beginning of the webinar. The decision we wanted to help you make today is to commit to make whatever changes are necessary this fall to connect the big picture to every staff member's everyday work. So go ahead and start your list. We're going to give you just a few seconds to do that before live Q&A. Start making your list, coming up with some ideas, and then we'll be back to answer your questions live.